The dust cloud on the horizon grew smaller until it disappeared completely. And Penelope Grant realized with bone-deep certainty that she was truly alone in the Arizona Territory wilderness, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a single canteen of water. The wagon train had left her behind 3 hours ago, casting her out like refuse after Mrs. Whitmore had accused her of stealing a silver locket that later turned up in the old woman's own trunk. But by then, the damage was done, and Wagon Master Henderson had already made his decision. Penelope had begged, pleaded, explained that she had never touched the locket, but Mrs. Whitmore was the widow of a prominent banker and Penelope was just an orphan traveling west to take a teaching position in California. The vote among the families had been swift and merciless. They left her with water and told her Florence was supposedly 15 miles south, though none of them knew for certain. She stood on the scrubby plain between scattered mesquite trees and rocky outcrops, the May sun beating down mercilessly as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She was 22 years old, had never spent a night alone in her entire life, and now faced the very real possibility of dying out here where vultures already circled something dead in the distance. The injustice of it burned in her chest, almost as hot as her fear. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she stood, abandoned. Penelope forced herself to breathe slowly and think. South. She needed to head south toward Florence. She had grown up in Philadelphia, had never been west of the Mississippi until 3 weeks ago, but she understood basic direction. The sun rose in the east and set in the west. She could figure this out. She had to. She started walking, her brown traveling dress already sticking to her skin despite the dry heat. The terrain was nothing like the green Pennsylvania countryside she had known. Everything here was brown and beige and harsh, with strange plants she did not recognize and rocks that seemed to shimmer in the heat. Her boots, which had seemed sturdy enough in Independence, Missouri, felt thin-soled against the rough ground. After 2 hours of walking, Penelope's water was half gone and her lips were beginning to crack. She had seen no sign of the town, no sign of anything human except the wagon ruts she had been following, which seemed to fork and split in confusing ways. Doubt crept in. Had they lied about the distance? Had they sent her in the wrong direction entirely, hoping nature would finish what their judgment had started? The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. Sweat soaked through her dress and evaporated almost immediately. She had never experienced heat like this, dry and relentless, seeming to pull moisture from her body through her very skin. Her head began to pound, and her vision swam at the edges. She stumbled, caught herself, kept walking because stopping meant dying, and she refused to give Mrs. Whitmore that satisfaction. When Penelope finally collapsed, it was not a dramatic fall but a gradual sinking to her knees and then onto her side in the minimal shade of a scraggly tree she did not know the name of. Her canteen was empty. She had tried to ration the water but had not understood how much she would need. The sky above was impossibly blue and empty of clouds. She closed her eyes and thought of her parents, dead of typhoid when she was 14, and wondered if she would see them soon. The sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fading consciousness like a dream. She could not open her eyes, could not move, could only lie there as the sound grew closer and then stopped. Boots hit the ground nearby. Strong hands touched her face, her neck, checking for life. "Jesus Christ," a man's voice said, low and rough. "What the hell happened to you?" Cool water touched her lips and Penelope gasped, her body responding even though her mind was foggy. The man supported her head and let her sip slowly, not too much at once despite her desperate need. "Easy now," he said. "Not too fast or you will make yourself sick. That is right, just small sips." Penelope managed to open her eyes and found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same hard landscape that had nearly killed her. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. His dark brown hair needed cutting, and several days of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore dusty range clothes and a battered hat hung down his back on a leather cord. "Can you talk?" he asked, studying her with concern. "What are you doing out here alone, Wagon train?" Penelope managed, her voice a painful rasp. "Left me." His expression darkened. "Left you out here? Why in God's name would they do that?" "Punishment," she whispered. "False accusation." The man sat back on his heels, his jaw tight with anger that seemed directed not at her but at the people who had abandoned her. "Those bastards. Pardon my language, but that is murder, plain and simple. You could have died out here." "Still might," Penelope said weakly. "Not on my watch." He slipped his arms under her and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Name is Pierce Keller. I've got a camp about a mile from here with shade and supplies. Going to get you fixed up, and then we are going to figure out what to do about those people who left you." Penelope wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of dignity, but her body had other ideas. She let her head rest against his shoulder as he carried her to his horse, a sturdy roan gelding that watched their approach with calm eyes. Pierce settled her in the saddle and swung up behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist to keep her upright as they rode. "Why are you out here?" Penelope asked, her voice still rough but getting stronger. "Was tracking a lost steer from my herd. Found you instead." She could hear something in his voice, something warm despite his rough manner. "Their loss is my blessing." Penelope did not have the energy to respond, but his words settled into her chest like something precious. After hours of believing herself worthless enough to be thrown away, someone had called finding her a blessing. Pierce's camp was situated in a small canyon with actual trees and a trickle of water running through it, clearly a regular stopping point. He had a bedroll supplies, a small fire ring with wood stacked nearby. He dismounted and lifted Penelope down with the same easy strength, carrying her to the shade and settling her on his bedroll. "Going to get you some proper water and food," he said. "You need to recover slow." "Have you eaten today?" Penelope shook her head. The wagon train had left her at dawn, and it was now well past midday. They had given her no food, just the single canteen. Pierce's expression turned thunderous again, but his hands were gentle as he prepared a small meal of dried meat, hardtack soaked in water to soften it, and careful amounts of water. He made her eat slowly despite her hunger, explaining that her body needed time to adjust. As Penelope's head cleared and her strength returned in small increments, she was able to study her rescuer more carefully. Pierce Keller moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in the wilderness. His hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, but they were patient and careful as he tended to her. When he caught her watching him, he gave her a slight smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. "You got a name?" he asked. "Penelope Grant." "I was traveling to California to take a teaching position." "Long way from California," Pierce observed, settling himself against a rock near her. "What did they accuse you of?" Penelope explained about the locket, about Mrs. Whitmore's accusations and the wagon master's swift judgment. Pierce listened without interrupting, but she could see the anger building in him again. "So they threw you out without proof, without even waiting to see if the locket turned up elsewhere," he said when she finished. "And they left you with almost no supplies to make it to town." "That is not justice, Miss Grant. That is cruelty dressed up as righteousness." "It does not matter now," Penelope said, though the words tasted bitter. "They are gone and I am here. I need to figure out how to get to Florence, and then find a way to continue to California, though I do not know how I will manage that without the money I paid for passage on the wagon train." Pierce was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape beyond their shaded canyon. "Florence is about 10 miles south of here. I could take you there tomorrow once you are recovered, but I have got a different proposition for you if you are willing to hear it." Penelope felt her heart beat faster. She was alone in the wilderness with a strange man, vulnerable and dependent on his kindness. But when she looked at Pierce Keller, she did not feel afraid. There was something fundamentally decent in his face despite the rough exterior. "I am listening," she said. "I run a small ranch about 5 miles north of Florence. It is not much, just me and about 200 head of cattle, but I have been building it up for 3 years now and it is starting to turn a profit. Problem is, I am trying to do everything myself and I am falling behind. I need help, but more than that, I need someone who can read and write and figure, someone who can help me manage the business side of things while I handle the ranch work." He met her eyes directly. "You are a teacher, which means you have got education and skills that are valuable out here. I could use someone like you. I can offer you room and board, a separate cabin I built last year that I have been using for storage, and a wage. Nothing fancy, but honest work, and you would be safe. You could stay as long as you wanted, save up money for California or wherever else you might want to go." Penelope stared at him, trying to process the offer. "You do not know me. I could be exactly what Mrs. Whitmore accused me of being. I could be a thief." Pierce shook his head. "I am a pretty good judge of character, Miss Grant. I have known plenty of thieves and liars in my time, and you do not have that look about you. Besides, anyone who keeps walking through this heat when they are dying of thirst has got more grit and honesty than most people I have met. Your wagon train's loss is definitely my blessing." There it was again, that phrase that made warmth bloom in Penelope's chest, despite everything she had been through today. She thought about her options. She could go to Florence with nothing, try to find work in a town where she knew no one, where she had no references and no guarantee of safety. Or she could accept this offer from a man who had saved her life, work honest labor, and have time to figure out her next steps. "I would want to see this separate cabin before I agree," Penelope said carefully. "And we would need to establish clear boundaries and expectations. I will not be taken advantage of, Mr. Keller." Pierce nodded, approval showing in his eyes. "Fair enough. We will go to the ranch tomorrow, and you can see everything. If you do not like it or do not feel comfortable, I will take you straight to Florence and give you enough money to get yourself settled there. You have got my word on that." They shook hands on it, his grip warm and strong around her smaller hand. Penelope felt something shift in that moment, some recognition between them that this meeting was the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. As evening fell and the temperature mercifully dropped, Pierce built a small fire and prepared a more substantial meal of beans and bacon. They talked as they ate, sharing pieces of their stories. Pierce had come west from Texas 5 years ago, working on various ranches before saving enough to buy his own land. He was 26 years old, had no family left that he knew of, and had built his life through sheer determination and backbreaking work. Penelope told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her parents' death, and the years she had spent living with her aunt and working as a governess. When a teaching position in California had been advertised with travel and housing provided, it had seemed like a chance for a fresh start, an adventure. Instead, it had nearly ended with her death in the desert. "I am sorry that happened to you," Pierce said quietly. "But I meant what I said earlier. Finding you today feels like providence. I had been praying for some kind of help, some way to get my ranch to the next level, and here you are." "Here I am," Penelope echoed, looking at this man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even thought to speak. "I suppose if I had to be abandoned in the desert, at least it was in a place where someone good found me." Pierce smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him handsome in a rugged, untamed way. "Get some rest, Miss Grant. We have got a ride ahead of us tomorrow." He gave her his bedroll and made himself a bed from his saddle, blanket, and coat, positioning himself between her and the open desert with his rifle close at hand. Penelope lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness night and the steady breathing of the man who had saved her life. She should have been terrified, should have been planning how to escape at first light. Instead, she felt safer than she had in weeks, since before Mrs. Whitmore's accusation had turned her fellow travelers against her. They set out at dawn, riding together on Pierce's horse with Penelope sitting in front of him, his arm around her waist to keep her steady. The contact should have been improper and uncomfortable, but instead it felt natural and right. Pierce kept the horse at an easy pace, stopping regularly to let Penelope drink and rest. The sun was high when they reached Pierce's ranch, and Penelope's first view of it made her breath catch. The main house was small but well built, constructed of adobe with a wooden porch and shuttered windows. Beyond it stood a barn and several corrals where cattle grazed, and off to the side, exactly as Pierce had described, was a smaller cabin that looked new and solid. Pierce helped her down from the horse and walked her to the cabin, opening the door to reveal a single room with a wood stove, a window with real glass, a bed frame waiting for a mattress, a table, and 2 chairs. It was simple but clean and private. "I know it is not much," Pierce said, suddenly seeming uncertain, "but it is sturdy and I can bring over a mattress and blankets and whatever else you might need." "It is perfect," Penelope said honestly. After believing she would die in the desert yesterday, this cabin looked like a palace. "I will take the position, Mr. Keller." Relief flooded Pierce's face. "Call me Pierce. If we are going to be working together, we might as well be on first-name terms. Then you should call me Penelope." He tried the name out, his rough voice making it sound different than it ever had before. "Penelope, it suits you." Over the next several days, Pierce and Penelope established a routine. He showed her the ranch's books, which were a disaster of scattered papers and rough calculations. Penelope spent her mornings organizing his accounts, creating proper ledgers, and identifying where money was being wasted or where investments could be made. In the afternoons, Pierce taught her about the ranch itself, introducing her to the cattle and horses, showing her the boundaries of his property, explaining the realities of ranching in Arizona territory. They took their meals together, cooking in turns in the main house's kitchen. Penelope discovered that Pierce was surprisingly good at making coffee and terrible at making anything else, while she could prepare decent meals from basic ingredients. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side, learning each other's rhythms and habits. What surprised Penelope most was how comfortable she felt with Pierce. He was unfailingly respectful, never pushing boundaries or making her feel unsafe, but there was an undercurrent of awareness between them that grew stronger each day. She caught herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his shoulders and arms, the competence in his hands. She noticed the way his eyes tracked her movements when he thought she was not looking, the small smiles that crossed his face when she said something that pleased him. 3 weeks after Penelope arrived at the ranch, a group of 5 men rode up to the property. Pierce tensed immediately, his hand dropping to the gun he wore at his hip, but he did not draw. Penelope watched from the porch as the riders approached. "That is Tom Weston," Pierce said quietly. "Owns the big ranch to the east. We have had some disputes about water rights." The lead rider, a heavy-set man in his 50s with cold eyes, looked from Pierce to Penelope with obvious interest. "Heard you had a woman here now, Keller. Did not believe it until I saw for myself." "This is Miss Grant. She manages my accounts and helps run the ranch. Is there something you need, Weston?" "Just being neighborly," Weston said, though his tone suggested anything but. "Wanted to remind you that the water in Mesquite Creek is mine. I have got the claim papers to prove it." "The creek runs through my land too," Pierce said evenly. "I have got as much right to that water as you do. See, that is where you are wrong." Weston leaned forward in his saddle. "I filed my claim first. You are trespassing when your cattle drink from that creek." Penelope felt Pierce's anger radiating off him in waves, but he kept his voice level. "Take that up with the court in Florence if you have got a problem. Until a judge tells me otherwise, my cattle will drink where they always have." Weston's eyes narrowed and his men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. Penelope's heart hammered in her chest, but Pierce did not back down, did not show any fear despite being outnumbered. "You are making a mistake, Keller," Weston said softly. "I tried to buy this land from you fair and square, but you turned me down. Now you are bringing women out here, playing rancher, acting like you are something more than a dirt-poor cowboy with delusions. This is not going to end well for you." "I think you should leave now," Pierce said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that made even Weston's men look nervous. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Weston laughed, though it was not a pleasant sound. "Watch yourself, Keller. Accidents happen out here all the time." The men rode away, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Pierce stood rigid until they were out of sight, then exhaled slowly and turned to Penelope. "I am sorry you had to see that. Weston has been trying to drive me off this land since I bought it. He thinks he should own everything in this valley." "What are you going to do?" Penelope asked, worried by the naked threat Weston had made. "Keep doing what I have been doing. This is my land, legally bought and paid for. I will not be bullied off it." Pierce met her eyes. "But I need you to know that there might be trouble. If you want to leave, if you want me to take you to Florence where you will be safe, I will understand." Penelope thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "I am not going anywhere. You helped me when I needed it most. I am not abandoning you just because some bully makes threats." Something shifted in Pierce's expression, something tender and fierce at the same time. "You are something else, Penelope Grant. You know that. I am a teacher from Philadelphia who nearly died in the desert. I am exactly as stubborn as I need to be to survive out here." Pierce laughed, and the tension between them suddenly changed from fear to something else entirely. They stood on the porch in the late afternoon sun, looking at each other, and Penelope felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. "I am glad you stayed," Pierce said softly. "Not just because of the ranch work. I am glad you are here, Penelope." "I am glad I am here too," she whispered. Pierce took a step closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Tell me to stop and I will. But I have been wanting to do this since the day I found you." "Do not stop," Penelope breathed. He kissed her then, soft and careful at first, as though she were something precious that might break. Penelope rose on her toes and wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with all the pent-up feeling that had been building between them for weeks. Pierce's arms came around her waist, pulling her close, and Penelope felt like she had finally come home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you. I know it is too soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know." "It is not too soon," Penelope said, her heart singing. "I am falling in love with you too. You saved my life, Pierce. You gave me a place to belong when I had nothing. How could I not love you? You deserve better than a struggling rancher in the middle of nowhere, Pierce said, but his arms tightened around her as though he could not bear to let her go. I deserve exactly what I want, and I want you. I want this life we are building together. I want to stay here and help you make this ranch everything you have dreamed of. Penelope pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. Unless you do not want that. I want that more than anything, Pierce said fervently. I want you here with me for as long as you will have me. They kissed again, longer and deeper, and when Pierce finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with desire and promise. We should probably do this properly. Court you like you deserve. Wait a respectable amount of time before we make any permanent decisions. We probably should, Penelope agreed, though neither of them moved apart. But I think we both know where this is heading. I hope it is heading toward you becoming Mrs. Keller, Pierce said, but only when you are ready. No pressure, no rush. Penelope smiled against his shoulder. Give me a few more months to be properly courted. Then ask me again. I can do that, Pierce promised. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Penelope's life. She and Pierce worked side by side every day, building the ranch's fortunes through careful planning and hard work. Penelope's organization and business sense combined with Pierce's ranching knowledge proved to be a powerful combination. They increased the herd, improved the grazing land, and established contracts with buyers in Florence that guaranteed good prices for their cattle. More than that, they built a life together. Pierce courted Penelope with all the earnestness of a man who knew he had found something rare and precious. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, taught her to ride properly, took her into Florence for church services and community dances. Penelope learned to shoot a rifle, to help with the cattle when needed, to thrive in the harsh Arizona landscape that had nearly killed her. The people of Florence gradually accepted her as part of their community. She helped the local children with their reading and arithmetic, becoming known as Miss Grant the teacher, despite not having an official position. Pierce became known as the lucky rancher who had found himself a wife in the desert, though they were not married yet. The story of how they met spread through the territory, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Tom Weston continued to make trouble, contesting water rights and property boundaries, but Pierce held firm with Penelope's support. She helped him document everything properly, file the right paperwork, build a case that could stand up in court if necessary. Weston's threats became less frequent when it became clear that Pierce was not going anywhere and had someone skilled helping him fight back. 6 months after Penelope arrived at the ranch, on a warm November evening, Pierce took her to the edge of their property where a small rise gave a view of the entire valley. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. I know I said I would give you time, Pierce began, taking both her hands in his. But I have loved you since the day I found you in the desert, Penelope. Every day since then has just made me more certain that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. You are smart and brave and stubborn, and you make everything in my life better just by being in it. He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. I know it is not fancy, and I know I cannot offer you a life of luxury, but I can offer you a partnership, a home, and all my love for as long as I live. Will you marry me, Penelope Grant? Penelope felt tears streaming down her face as she pulled Pierce to his feet. Yes, yes, I will marry you. I love you so much, Pierce Keller. You found me when I was lost and gave me everything I did not even know I needed. Of course I will marry you. Pierce slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her deeply, holding her tight as the sun set over their land. When they finally returned to the ranch house that night, they were both grinning like fools, already making plans for their future together. They were married in Florence's small church 3 weeks later, just before Christmas of 1882. The ceremony was simple but well attended, with most of the town turning out to see the teacher and the rancher who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Penelope wore a cream-colored dress that one of the town's ladies had helped her sew, and Pierce wore his best suit with his hair neatly trimmed and his face cleanly shaved. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, Tom Weston stood up in the back of the church. Penelope's heart sank, but Pierce's hand tightened around hers reassuringly. "I've got no objection to the marriage," Weston said, surprising everyone. "But I came here to apologize. I have been a stubborn, prideful fool, Keller, and I am sorry for the trouble I caused you and your lady." He looked at Penelope directly. "Mrs. Keller, your husband came to see me last week with a proposal for sharing the water rights on Mesquite Creek. It was fair and well-reasoned, and it made me realize I have been acting like a selfish child instead of a good neighbor. I accepted his proposal, and I wanted to say so publicly." Pierce looked as stunned as Penelope felt, but he recovered quickly. "Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that." Weston nodded and sat down, and the ceremony continued. When Pierce kissed his bride, the entire church erupted in applause and cheers. Penelope laughed against Pierce's lips, overwhelmed with joy and the sense that everything had finally fallen into place. The reception was held at the town hall, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the territory. Pierce and Penelope danced together as man and wife for the first time, moving in slow circles while their neighbors clapped and celebrated around them. "I cannot believe this is my life now," Penelope murmured against Pierce's shoulder. "6 months ago, I was dying in the desert. Now I am married to the man I love, surrounded by a community that has accepted me." "Their loss was definitely my blessing," Pierce said, echoing the words he had spoken the day they met. "I love you, Mrs. Keller." "I love you too, Mr. Keller. Now take me home." They left the reception early amid knowing smiles and good-natured teasing, riding back to the ranch together under a sky full of stars. Pierce carried Penelope over the threshold of the main house, which they had spent the past weeks preparing as their shared home. The cabin where Penelope had lived was now properly converted to storage as originally intended. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a celebration of everything they meant to each other. Pierce was gentle and patient, making sure Penelope felt cherished and safe as they came together as husband and wife for the first time. Penelope gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her body the way she had already trusted him with her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. Pierce wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy the neighboring property when old Mr. Henderson decided to retire. Penelope wanted to start a proper school in Florence, give the children there the same quality education she would have provided in California. Together, they planned a life full of work and love and possibility. The first year of their marriage brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. A harsh winter killed some of their cattle, but Pierce's planning and Penelope's careful management of their finances meant they survived when other ranchers struggled. A summer drought tested them again, but the water-sharing agreement with Tom Weston proved invaluable. They worked sunrise to sunset most days, but they always made time for each other, for stolen kisses in the barn and quiet evenings on the porch watching the desert sunset. In the spring of 1884, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Pierce over breakfast one morning, watching his face transform from surprise to absolute joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he said wonderingly, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair and press his face against her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, running her fingers through his hair. "I am terrified and thrilled and so damn happy I could burst," Pierce said, looking up at her with shining eyes. "You are going to be such a good mother, Penelope, and I am going to do everything I can to be a good father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Penelope said with absolute certainty. "Our child is lucky to have you." The pregnancy was not easy. The Arizona heat in summer was brutal, and Penelope struggled with nausea and exhaustion. But Pierce was attentive and supportive, taking over more of the physical work and making sure Penelope rested. The women of Florence rallied around her as well, bringing food and advice, helping her prepare for the baby's arrival. Mrs. Weston, Tom's wife, became a particular friend, making up for her husband's earlier hostility by teaching Penelope everything she knew about raising children in the territory. On a cold December night in 1884, with Pierce holding her hand and the doctor and midwife in attendance, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Pierce Keller, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. Pierce held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, looking at the tiny person in his arms with absolute awe. "Hello, James. I am your papa, and I promise I am going to do right by you. I am going to give you a good life and teach you to be a good man." Penelope watched her husband bond with their child and felt her heart expand with so much love she thought it might break. This was her family, born from tragedy and chance and choice. The wagon train that had abandoned her had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life that was more than she had ever imagined possible. The years flowed by in the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere and loved to sit on his mother's lap while she read to him. In 1886, Penelope gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Grace, who had their father wrapped around their tiny fingers from the moment they arrived. 3 years later, another son came, William, completing their family. The ranch prospered under Pierce and Penelope's management. They bought the Henderson property in 1887, doubling their land and herd size. Penelope did eventually start her school in Florence, teaching in the mornings while Pierce handled the ranch work, and their older children attended along with the other town children. They became pillars of the community, known for their fairness and generosity, always willing to help neighbors in need. Tom Weston became one of their closest friends. His earlier antagonism transformed into mutual respect and genuine affection. He and his wife were godparents to the twins, and their families celebrated holidays together. Pierce and Tom worked together on several community projects, including building a new church and establishing a cattlemen's association that protected the interests of all the ranchers in the valley. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce and Penelope took a rare evening away from the children, riding out to the spot where he had proposed. The desert sunset was as beautiful as it had been that first time, painting everything in gold and fire. "You ever regret it?" Pierce asked, holding Penelope close as they watched the sun descend. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if that wagon train had not left you behind?" Penelope thought about the question seriously before answering. "I think about it sometimes. I probably would have made it to California, taken that teaching position, lived a perfectly respectable life. But I would not have had you. I would not have had our children or this ranch or this community. I would not have had this life that I love so much." She turned in his arms to face him directly. "That wagon train leaving me was the most terrible and most wonderful thing that ever happened to me. It brought me to you, Pierce. It brought me home. So no, I do not regret a single thing." "Their loss was my blessing," Pierce said softly, kissing her forehead. "Every day I thank God that I found you out there in the desert. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Keller." "And you are mine," Penelope said. "My rescuer, my partner, my love. Always." They stood together as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Behind them stretched 10 years of shared life, and ahead lay decades more, full of work and love and the everyday miracles of family. The desert that had nearly killed Penelope had instead given her everything she never knew she needed. The false accusation and cruel punishment that could have ended her life had led her to Pierce, to love, to home. It was not the life she had planned, but it was so much better than anything she could have imagined. As they rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, Penelope looked at the stars scattered across the vast Arizona sky and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Not for the cruelty that had abandoned her, but for the kindness that had found her. Not for the ending she had expected, but for the beginning she had been given instead. The ranch house lights glowed warm in the distance, and Penelope could picture their children inside, James probably reading to his younger siblings, the twins arguing over something inconsequential, William getting into some kind of mischief. She thought of the life she and Pierce had built together, the community they were part of, the future stretching bright before them. "What are you thinking about?" Pierce asked, glancing at her with that smile she loved so much. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Penelope said. "I am thinking about how I would go through it all again, all the pain and fear and injustice, just to end up right here with you." Pierce reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "I love you, Penelope, more than I could ever put into words." "I love you too, always and forever." They reached the ranch as the last light faded completely from the sky, coming home together the way they would for all the years to come. Inside, their children's voices called out greeting and welcome. The house smelled of dinner keeping warm and wood smoke and home. Pierce helped Penelope down from her horse, and they stood for a moment in the yard, looking at the life they had created. "Come on," Penelope said, tugging Pierce toward the door. "Our family is waiting." They walked into the house hand in hand, closing the door against the desert night, secure in the warmth and love they had built together. It was not the ending Penelope had imagined when she set out for California all those years ago, but it was so much better. It was real and hard-won and precious, a love born in the wilderness and refined by time and choice and commitment. The years continued to pass in the way years do, bringing both joy and sorrow, but always moving forward. James grew into a young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's keen mind. At 18, he took over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, allowing Pierce and Penelope to step back slightly and enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. The twins, Sarah and Grace, proved to be as different as two people could be despite their identical faces. Sarah loved the ranch life and could rope and ride as well as any cowboy. Grace preferred books and learning, eventually going east to attend a women's college with her parents' blessing and support. William, the baby of the family, had a gift with horses that amazed everyone who watched him work. In 1895, Pierce and Penelope celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a large party that brought together friends and family from across Arizona territory. Tom Weston stood up during the festivities to toast the couple, his voice carrying across the crowded barn they had decorated for the occasion. 20 years ago, most of us here did not know Pierce Keller or his bride, Tom said. But in the years since, they have become the heart of this community. They have shown us what real partnership looks like, what it means to build something lasting through hard work and love. I am proud to call them friends, and I am grateful for everything they have contributed to making this valley a place worth living." The crowd cheered, and Pierce and Penelope stood together, holding hands, both of them gray-haired now but still looking at each other with the same love and devotion they had felt as newlyweds. They danced together as the sun set, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, for James had married young and already had 2 children of his own, and by friends who had become family over the years. 20 years, Penelope murmured against Pierce's shoulder as they swayed to the music. "It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. Best 20 years of my life," Pierce said. "Well, technically the best 20 years and 6 months, since I found you 6 months before we married." Penelope laughed, the sound as bright and genuine as it had been when she was 22. "You are never going to let me forget that you found me dying in the desert, are you?" "Never," Pierce confirmed, grinning. "It is the most important thing I ever did. Everything good in my life started the day I found you." "Everything good in my life started then too," Penelope said softly. "I was so angry at those wagon train people for so long, Pierce. Angry at the injustice and cruelty of what they did. But I have let that go now. I forgave them years ago, not because what they did was right, but because holding on to anger was poisoning my happiness. They made a terrible, cruel decision based on lies and prejudice. But their terrible decision gave me you and this life and our family. I cannot regret what led me here." Pierce pulled back to look at his wife, seeing the wisdom and peace in her face. "You are a remarkable woman, Penelope Keller." "Have I told you that lately?" "Not since this morning," Penelope teased, "but I am happy to hear it again." They continued dancing as the stars came out overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the birth of each of their children, every important moment of the life they had built together. Around them, their family and community celebrated, but Pierce and Penelope were lost in their own world, in the private joy of a love that had started with tragedy and grown into something unshakable. As the night wore on and the party eventually wound down, Pierce and Penelope walked back to their house hand in hand. Their children had all gone to their own homes, giving their parents this night to themselves. The house was quiet and peaceful, full of memories and still capable of holding more. "Do you remember what you said to me the day you found me?" Penelope asked as they sat on the porch, looking out at the dark desert under its blanket of stars. "After you gave me water and decided to help me." "I said a lot of things that day," Pierce replied, though he knew exactly what she meant. "You said their loss is my blessing," Penelope reminded him. "You said it like you meant it, like finding a half-dead woman in the desert was the best thing that could have happened to you." "It was the best thing that could have happened to me," Pierce said firmly. "I meant it then and I mean it now. Finding you, loving you, building this life with you has been the greatest blessing I could have imagined. You made me better than I was, Penelope. You gave me a reason to dream bigger and work harder. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose beyond just surviving. You were absolutely my blessing." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the warmth of his body next to hers. "And you were mine, my rescue and my redemption and my home. I love you so much, Pierce Keller." "I love you too, my Penelope. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky and thinking their own thoughts about the improbable journey that had brought them together. Somewhere out there in the desert, the place where Pierce had found Penelope still existed, unchanged by time or memory. But they had changed, grown, built something lasting and beautiful from the worst moment of Penelope's life. The next morning, they woke early as they always did. even though there was less physical work demanding their immediate attention, now that James had taken over most of the ranching responsibilities. They had breakfast together in the kitchen that had been the scene of 1,000 family meals, talking about small things and large things, planning their day and their week and the rest of their lives. When James came by later that morning with his children, Pierce took his grandchildren out to see the new foals while James and Penelope reviewed the ranch accounts together. Watching her son work through the ledgers with the same careful attention she had taught him years ago, Penelope felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The business she and Pierce had built would continue into the next generation and beyond. Their legacy would be more than just land and cattle. It would be the values they had instilled in their children, the community they had helped build, the lives they had touched. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, life on the ranch continued in its steady rhythm. Grace came home from college for a visit, full of ideas and enthusiasm about women's rights and education reform. Sarah announced that she and her husband were expecting their first child. William won several prizes at the territorial fair for his horsemanship. Pierce and Penelope watched it all with pride and joy, marveling at the family they had created. On a warm October evening, Pierce and Penelope took one of their regular rides out to their special spot overlooking the valley. The sunset was particularly spectacular, all gold and crimson and purple, painting the desert in colors that seemed impossible and yet were completely real. "I have been thinking," Pierce said, his arm around Penelope's waist as they stood watching the sun descend, "about what we have accomplished here, about what it all means." "And what does it mean?" Penelope asked, curious about where his thoughts had led him. "It means that love is stronger than cruelty," Pierce said slowly, working out his thoughts as he spoke. "Those people who left you to die, they thought they were serving some kind of justice, but really they were just being cruel and afraid, and their cruelty could have won. You could have died out there and that would have been the end of the story. But instead, love won. I found you and loved you and we built this life together. We turned their cruelty into something beautiful." He turned to face Penelope directly, his weathered face serious in the fading light. "That is what I want our grandchildren to know, Penelope. I want them to know that their grandmother survived something terrible and came out the other side stronger. I want them to know that even when people are cruel and unjust, love and kindness can still win. That is our legacy." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes at her husband's words. "That is a good legacy, Pierce, a legacy worth leaving." "I could not have done any of it without you," Pierce said. "You are my partner in everything. You have been since the day I found you." "Their loss was your blessing," Penelope said, smiling through her tears, "and you were mine." They kissed as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build a life together. The desert around them was harsh and unforgiving, but they had learned to not just survive in it, but to thrive. They had turned an ending into a beginning, a tragedy into a love story, a punishment into a blessing. As the years continued to pass, Pierce and Penelope grew old together with grace and dignity. They watched their children have children, and those children have children of their own. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and new generations of Kellers learned to love the land their great-grandparents had built a life on. In 1905, the territory of Arizona was moving closer to statehood, and Pierce and Penelope attended community meetings discussing what that would mean for their region. They were in their 60s now, gray-haired and slower-moving but still sharp of mind and strong of spirit. Pierce still rode out to check on the cattle most days, though James tried to discourage him. Penelope still taught reading to the youngest children in Florence, believing that education was the key to a better future. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. 4 generations of Kellers, all descended from that chance meeting in the desert so many years ago. Sarah had become a successful rancher in her own right, owning property adjacent to the family ranch. Grace had returned from the East with a husband and was teaching at the Territorial University in Tucson. William ran a horse breeding program that was known throughout the Southwest. James continued to manage the family ranch, expanding it beyond even Pierce's ambitious dreams. As Pierce and Penelope stood together watching their family celebrate, both of them felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. This was the life they had built together, the legacy they would leave behind. Every person here existed because Pierce had found Penelope in the desert 30.5 years ago, because he had chosen kindness over indifference, because they had chosen each other again and again over the years. "I want to go back there," Penelope said suddenly. "To the place where you found me. I know it has been decades, but I want to see it one more time." Pierce understood immediately. "Tomorrow, we will go tomorrow, just the 2 of us." They rode out early the next morning, following Pierce's memory and old landmarks to find the approximate spot where he had come across Penelope all those years ago. The desert looked much the same, perhaps a bit more sparse, perhaps slightly different, but essentially unchanged by the passage of time. Pierce and Penelope dismounted and stood together, looking at the unremarkable piece of ground that had been the pivot point of both their lives. It was just desert, just rock and sand and scraggly plants, but to them, it was sacred ground, the place where their story had truly begun. "I was so scared," Penelope said quietly. "I really thought I was going to die here. I had given up hope when I heard your horse approaching." "I almost rode past," Pierce admitted. "I was focused on finding that lost steer, and I almost missed you lying there in the shade. But something made me look, some instinct or divine intervention or just luck. And there you were." "There I was," Penelope echoed, "waiting for you without knowing it. Waiting for my life to really start." Pierce pulled her close, holding her tight against his chest. "I love you, Penelope. I have loved you since the moment I saw you. Loving you has been the easiest and best thing I have ever done." "I love you too," Penelope said. "You saved me, Pierce. Not just my life, but everything I could have been. You gave me a chance to become the person I was meant to be." They stood there for a long time, 2 old people remembering the young people they had been, honoring the journey they had taken together. When they finally mounted up and rode back toward the ranch, they both felt a sense of peace and completion. They had come full circle, returning to the beginning to remember how it all started. The years continued their steady march, bringing both joy and inevitable sorrow. In 1910, Tom Weston passed away peacefully in his sleep, and Pierce mourned the loss of the man who had become one of his closest friends. They buried Tom on his ranch with half the territory in attendance, testimony to the respect he had earned over his lifetime. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, and Pierce and Penelope celebrated with their community. They had been part of building this place from rough frontier into an organized state, and they felt proud of their contribution. Their children and grandchildren would inherit not just land and cattle, but a stable, civilized society with laws and schools and opportunities. As Pierce and Penelope entered their 70s, they gradually slowed down, spending more time on the porch watching the sunset and less time working. But their minds stayed sharp and their love stayed strong. They held hands like young sweethearts, finishing each other's sentences, communicating with looks and gestures built from decades of partnership. In the spring of 1915, Pierce fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts and Penelope's devoted nursing, he did not recover. On a quiet morning with Penelope holding his hand and their children gathered around, Pierce Keller passed away peacefully at the age of 72. Penelope felt like her heart had been torn from her chest. They had had 52.5 years together, from that day in the desert to this final morning, and it was not enough. It would never have been enough. Pierce had been her partner, her love, her home for more than half a century, and the world felt impossibly empty without him. They buried Pierce on the rise overlooking the valley, the place where he had proposed and where they had returned so many times over the years. The entire community turned out for the funeral, everyone who had known and respected Pierce Keller coming to pay their final respects. As Penelope stood by the grave, supported by her children, she remembered the words Pierce had said to her so many years ago. "Their loss is my blessing." Finding each other had been a blessing for both of them, and she would be forever grateful for every moment they had shared. In the months after Pierce's death, Penelope struggled with grief, but was sustained by her family and her faith. She continued to live in the ranch house surrounded by memories, finding comfort in the life they had built together. Her children and grandchildren visited often, making sure she was never alone unless she chose to be. On the first anniversary of Pierce's death, Penelope rode out alone to his grave. She sat on the ground beside the headstone, talking to him as though he were still there to hear her. "I miss you every day," she said. "The house is too quiet without you. The sunset is not as beautiful when I cannot share it with you, but I am still here, Pierce, still living the life we built together. Our children are thriving. Our grandchildren are growing strong. The ranch is doing well. Everything you worked for continues. I just wanted you to know that." She sat in silence for a while, feeling the Arizona sun warm on her face and the desert breeze stirring her gray hair. Then she spoke again, her voice stronger. "I have been thinking about that day you found me. About how my life could have ended there in the desert, how I should have died from the heat and thirst. But you found me, Pierce. You saved me and gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. 52 years with you was a gift, and I am grateful for every single day." Penelope stood, her movements slower than they once were but still strong. "I will be here as long as I am needed. Our family needs me and I have work still to do. But when my time comes, I will be ready. I will be ready to see you again, my love. Wait for me." She rode back to the ranch as the sun set behind her, returning to the house full of memories and love. She lived for 5 more years, watching great-grandchildren be born, seeing the ranch continue to prosper, remaining the matriarch of the Keller family until the very end. In the summer of 1920, at the age of 80, Penelope Grant Keller passed away peacefully in her sleep. They buried her next to Pierce on the rise overlooking the valley they had loved. At the funeral, her oldest grandson, James Jr., spoke about his grandparents' love story, about how they had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and beautiful together. "My grandfather used to say that finding my grandmother was his blessing," James said to the gathered crowd. "That her wagon train's loss was his gain. But the truth is, they were both blessed to find each other. They showed all of us what real love looks like, what partnership and commitment and devotion mean. They left us more than land and cattle. They left us an example of how to live, how to love, how to turn tragedy into triumph." The Keller Ranch continued for generations, the story of Pierce and Penelope becoming family legend. Their descendants would visit the graves on the rise and remember the great-great-grandparents who had started it all. The cowboy who had found a dying woman in the desert and recognized his blessing when he saw it. The desert where Penelope had nearly died remained unchanged, indifferent to the human drama that had played out on its harsh landscape. But the life that had grown from that moment, the love that had bloomed in the wilderness. That was the real miracle. Two people who should never have met, whose paths should never have crossed, had found each other and chosen each other and built something that lasted beyond their own lifetimes. Their loss was his blessing. Those words, spoken on a desperate day so many years ago, had proven to be prophetic. The wagon train's cruel decision to abandon Penelope had led her directly to Pierce, to love, to home. The injustice and prejudice that could have killed her had instead given her everything she never knew she needed. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Love had won. Kindness had triumphed. Their story had gotten the ending it deserved, not because it was easy or simple, but because they had chosen each other every single day and built their happiness one moment at a time. The sun continued to rise and set over the Arizona desert, painting the landscape in gold and crimson. The wind continued to blow across the empty spaces where Pierce had once found Penelope. And on the rise overlooking the valley, two headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of a love that had started with tragedy and ended with triumph, a blessing born from loss, a happily ever after earned through decades of devotion. Pierce Keller, 1843–1915. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, Penelope Grant Keller, 1840–1920. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. Their loss was his blessing, and beneath both names carved deep into the stone, together forever.